The movie Poltergeist was released in 1982 and quickly became one of the most beloved films of its generation and a true classic of the supernatural horror genre. It tells the story of the Freeling family. The father is played by Craig Nelson, the mother by JoBeth Williams, the son by Oliver Robbins, and the two daughters are portrayed by Heather O'Rourke and Dominique Dunne. Inexplicable things happen in the family home, the TV goes on, things move on their own, and gradually these happenings become more and more terrifying. Heather's character is even carried away by spirits into the netherworld through the TV set. A team of psychics arrives to deal with the poltergeist, and they find out that the neighborhood is built on an old cemetery. As for the rest of the story, I won't spoil it any further in case you haven't seen it. A total of 3 poltergeist movies have been made. The first one was written and produced by Steven Spielberg, and it was an incredible success. The second and third parts were not as successful, the cast and director had changed, the accents had shifted. The critics' reviews and the ratings speak for themselves. The franchise has also been somewhat spoiled by the fact that the films are surrounded by creepy rumors. Some say that Poltergeist is cursed. The actors in the film died one by one under strange circumstances. Naturally, one can write off what happened as a series of coincidences, but it all sounds rather creepy nonetheless. Think about it, the young Heather O'Rourke who played Carol Ann in all 3 films died suddenly in 1988 of septic shock caused by intestinal obstruction. Doctors suspected that she had Crohn's disease, but could not confirm it for sure. She was given medication that made her face swell slightly, which can be seen in the movies and her photo shoots. In January 31st, 1988, the day of the Super Bowl, Heather died. What did the Super Bowl have to do with it? You might recall that in the movie, there was a poster in the children's room with a date from the future written on it, Super Bowl 88. And that turned out to be the date of Heather's death. Another victim of the so-called poltergeist curse was Will Sampson, who played the good spirit in the second film. He died of complications from a surgery he needed because of his scleroderma, an autoimmune disease of the blood vessels. He died in 1987. During filming, real skeletons were used as props, but the actors didn't know this, and Will Sampson even made his way to the set at night to perform a special ritual to placate the spirits. The death of Julian Beck, who played the evil spirit, can hardly be deemed unexpected, since he was old and suffering from stomach cancer. He did not have time to finish filming, and his character turned out to be especially frightening because of the actor's thinness. Another actor, Richard Lawson, nearly died in a plane crash. He was aboard US Air Flight 405, which went down in March 1992. 27 people out of a total of 51 on board died. Lawson survived, but still such a near-death experience couldn't help but alert fans of the franchise. And then, in 2009, another actor who played a supporting role in Poltergeist was murdered. Lou Perryman was 67 years old when he was fatally attacked with an axe in his own home by a criminal who had just been released from prison. Another name among the victims of the Poltergeist curse is that of Dominique Dunne. Dominique Dunne was born on November 23, 1959 in Santa Monica, California. She was the youngest child of producer, screenwriter, and journalist Dominique Dunne, and was named after her father. Her mother, Ellen Griffin, was a ranch owner known to everyone simply as Lenny. Dominique had 2 older brothers, Alex and Griffin, the latter of whom is best known to television viewers as Nicky Pearson on the acclaimed NBC series This Is Us. Dominique was Lenny's 5th pregnancy. 2 babies born before her died when they were only a few days old from lung disease, common at that time among children born by C-section. So the parents said they loved Dominique threefold, giving her the love they had had for the children who died as infants. Dominique's aunt and uncle were a famous couple, writer John Gregory Dunne and Joan Didion, and her godmother was the daughter of Hollywood legend Gary Cooper, Maria. The family was tightly knit and happy. Dominique adored her family. She felt comfortable in the world of Hollywood stars, movie premieres, and fancy dinners, but did not absorb their snobbery, instead remaining open to the world. Dominique helped homeless animals. In 1967, Dominique's parents divorced but maintained an excellent relationship. At this time, Dominique entered the prestigious Harvard Westlake School in Los Angeles. After graduating from high school, Dominique spent a year in Florence where she studied art and learned Italian. Her father visited her there. In 1975, Dominique's mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and that news hit the young Dominique hard. Unfortunately, Lenny's condition continued deteriorating, and in a few years she ended up in a wheelchair. After finishing her studies in Italy, Dominique briefly moved to New York before returning to Beverly Hills. There, she decided she was ready to go into acting and began taking acting classes at Colorado State University in the studio of Milton Katselas. She participated in various theatrical productions and was good at it. Soon, Dominique began attending auditions. Success was not long in coming. Dominique's first role was in the 1979 film Diary of a Teenage Hitchhiker. She then got minor roles in episodes of popular television shows in the 1980s. She also appeared in several other movies such as The Day the Loving Stopped and the comedy drama film Breaking Away. But you most likely know her from the 1981 movie Poltergeist by Steven Spielberg. In it, Dominique Dunne played Dana Freeling, a teenage girl who is terrorized by a supernatural creature that lives in her house. The film was very successful, both at the box office and in critical reviews. Dominique Dunne's performance was also highly praised. Critics said this would be the first of many major roles that the young actress would undoubtedly get throughout her career. The success of the first Poltergeist inspired directors to create a sequel, and Dominique Dunne was already preparing to return to her role of Dana Freeling. In addition, she got a role in the pilot of the sci-fi miniseries V. Dunne was on her way to becoming the new Scream Queen. Unfortunately, this story does not have a happy ending, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it here. In 1981, Dominique met a young man named John Thomas Sweeney at a party. John was from a large family, the eldest of 5 children. He had broken off relations with his family for unknown reasons. John lived poorly and didn't even own a car, and this was in Los Angeles. He was a little older than Dominique and worked as a chef at Ma Maison, a trendy French restaurant in Los Angeles. The restaurant was geared towards such an elite milieu that its phone number wasn't even in the phone book. Only a select few could get in. Dominique and John's romance developed rapidly. Only a few weeks after getting to know each other, they moved in together into a house on Rangeley Avenue in West Hollywood. Dominique even introduced her new boyfriend to her parents. Her father remembered that day very well. We watched an episode of the television series Fame in which Dominique was the guest star, and then went out to dinner. At one moment when the 4 of us were alone, the boys teased Dominique about marriage, and she said oh no, she was not going to get married, and I knew she meant it. I was relieved, for although I could see that Sweeney was excessively devoted to her, there was something off-putting about him. That night I phoned her mother and said, "He's much more in love with her than she is with him." And Lenny said, "You're absolutely right." The next morning, Dominique's brother Alex told his father what happened when he had left them. Alex explained that he didn't like his sister's boyfriend at all. And here's why. When Sweeney excused himself to the bathroom, the man at the bar recognized Dominique sitting at the table, walked up to her, and said her famous line from Poltergeist, "What's going on?" She laughed. The movie was so often shown on television that the line had become a well-known catchphrase, and Dominique was used to being recognized in cafes and on the street. The man wasn't trying to flirt, he just loved the movie Poltergeist. But when John Sweeney returned to the table and saw some stranger chatting with Dominique, he became enraged. John clawed at the man like a cat. Alex quickly realized that Sweeney's reaction was inadequate to what had happened. Something was clearly wrong with him. As the father heard this story, he thought that Dominique would have a hard time getting out of the hands of such a jealous man. Dominique herself confessed to him, "He's not in love with me, Dad. He's obsessed with me. It's driving me crazy." The father decided not to bother with his moralizing and worrying. How many times he regretted it later on. But in truth, it is not always clear how a parent should behave in such situations. Share their fears. What if they are just a false impression and his suspicions will be met with hostility and ruin the relationship with his daughter? It's a tough choice, but it's worth considering given what happened to Dominique afterward. On the 4th of July, the father, daughter, and her boyfriend were having lunch at the River Cafe under Brooklyn Bridge. It was a beautiful evening. We sat at a table by the window watching the fireworks. Dominique's father would later write, "He had an unpleasant impression of John. He felt the young man had difficulty communicating, was stiff, and often quiet." The father became even more wary when Dominique and John began to quarrel. John was constantly jealous of his girlfriend. He was so hot-tempered that the family noticed bruises on Dominique several times. On August 27, 1982, during one of such quarrels, John even ripped out a strand of Dominique's hair. Frightened, she ran away from home. She arrived at her mother's house and Sweeney followed her. Banging on the windows and doors, he demanded to be let in to talk to Dominique. But Lenny told him to leave and threatened to call the police. A few days later, though, Dominique returned to him. Apparently, they had reconciled. Their relationship could now be considered a classic example of the abusive cycle, where the pattern repeats itself over and over again: tension, violence, reconciliation, and a temporary calm. The phases of violence and reconciliation are equally vivid. As hateful as the abuser is in one episode, he will be equally apologetic in the next one. And it will all happen again after a short break. But alas, recognizing the cycle was not so easy back then, since psychotherapy and family psychology were only just developing. Eventually, after a lot of talking and pleas to resolve conflicts peacefully, Dominique decided to end her relationship with John. The final straw was another quarrel on September 26, 1982. On that day, John grabbed Dominique by the throat, threw her to the floor, and began strangling her. A friend who was home with the couple at the time heard the sounds of the struggle and ran into their room. Dominique broke free from John's grasp and admitted to her friend that John had tried to kill her, but he waved the girl off and told her to return to the bedroom. Dawn pretended she was going to obey his order, but instead went to the bathroom where she opened the window and got out of the house. John heard her start the car. He ran out of the house and jumped on the roof of her car. Dominique stopped, waited for John to jump off, and then finally drove away. She spent the next few days at her mother's house and with friends. Dominique told Sweeney about her decision to leave him from a safe distance over the phone. And it seemed to work. John moved out of their house. After that, Dominique moved back into the house and changed the locks. But her newly found peaceful life did not last long. On October 30th, 1982, Dominique was at home rehearsing a scene with acting partner David Packer. Suddenly, they were interrupted by a phone call from a friend of hers. While Dominique was chatting with her friend, John Sweeney also dialed the ex-girlfriend's number. In those days, calls were still made through an operator. John, in response to the line being busy, demanded that the operator terminate the ongoing call. Dominique then told her friend, "Oh my god, it's Sweeney calling. I don't want to talk to him." About 10 minutes later, there was another ring. This time, it was the doorbell. It was John Sweeney. After talking to him briefly from behind the door, Dominique agreed to go out on the porch. Her acting partner Packer remained in the house. Dominique walked out the door. According to Packer, just a few seconds later he heard a scream, a banging sound, and a noise as if someone had fallen. Packer tried to call the police but reached the wrong department, so he then called a friend and left a message on his answering machine saying that if he was killed, it was John Sweeney's doing. Afterwards, David went outside through the back door and approached the parking lot outside the house. There, he saw Sweeney kneeling over the lifeless body of Dominique Dunne. When the police finally arrived, Sweeney threw his hands up in the air and confessed that he had tried to kill his girlfriend and then himself. Deputy Frank D'Amelio, the first officer to arrive on the scene, testified that Sweeney told him, "Man, I blew it. I killed her. I didn't think I choked her that hard, but I don't know. I just kept on choking her. I just lost my temper and blew it again." Again, did you hear that? What did he mean? That he already attacked Dominique, or that Dominique wasn't the first? We have yet to find out. Dominique's heart was barely beating. There was hope that she could still be saved. She was taken to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where she was immediately put on life support. The doctors performed a brain examination which showed that the short-term hypoxia had caused brain activity to cease. In other words, she was brain dead. Here's how Dominique's father recalled that day. When the telephone in my New York apartment woke me at 5 o'clock in the morning on October 31st in 1982, I sensed as I reached for the receiver that disaster loomed. Detective Harold Johnston of the Los Angeles Homicide Bureau told me that my 22-year-old daughter, Dominique, was near death at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. I asked him if he had notified my wife. He said he was calling from her house. Lenny got on the phone and said, "I need you." "What happened?" I asked, afraid to hear. "Sweeney," she answered. "I'll be on the first plane." Lenny's house on Crescent Drive was full of people when we got there. All the television sets and radios were on for news bulletins. In the midst of this confusion sat Lenny in her wheelchair. She was very calm. "The news is not good," she said to me, and within minutes I heard the words brain damage being whispered around the house. Dominique's parents knew no more than any other Los Angeles resident about their daughter's condition. They had to go to the hospital and talk to the doctors, and most importantly, to see their daughter. The doctor at the medical center warned that Dominique's brain had to be examined at least 3 more times to see if there was any hope of saving her. He also asked the father's permission to insert a bolt into her daughter's skull to relieve the pressure on her brain. When the time came to go to the hospital, everybody was full of dreadful apprehension. Some friends told Lenny, "You mustn't go. It would be a terrible mistake to look at her this way. You must remember her as she was." Everyone was worried about Lenny's health, since stress is very dangerous for people with multiple sclerosis. But Lenny replied, "The mistake would be if I didn't see her. That is what I would have to live with." They went to the hospital with their sons. A nurse appeared and told us that after we had seen Dominique, the doctors would want to talk with us. She said that no one but immediate family would be allowed in and asked us to show identification. They were afraid the press would try to pass themselves off as members of the family. She warned us that it would be a shock to look at her, that we should be prepared. I worried about Lenny and looked over at her. She closed her eyes, bowed her head, and took a deep breath. I watched her will strength into herself through some inner spiritual force in a moment so intensely private that I dared not even later question her about it. Of the 4 of us, she was the strongest when we entered the room. At first, I did not realize that the person on the bed was Dominique. There were tubes in her everywhere, and the life support system caused her to breathe in and out with a grotesque jerking movement that seemed a parody of life. Her eyes were open, massively enlarged, staring sightlessly up at the ceiling. Her beautiful hair had been shaved off. A large bolt had been screwed into her skull to relieve the pressure on her brain. Her neck was purpled and swollen. Vividly visible on it were the marks of the massive hands of the man who had strangled her. It was nearly impossible to look at her, but also impossible to look away. Lenny wheeled her chair to the bed, took Dominique's hands in hers, and spoke to her in a voice of complete calm. "Hello, my darling, it's Mom. We're all here, Dominique. Dad and Griffin and Alex. We love you." Her words released us, and the boys and I stepped forward and surrounded the bed, each touching a different part of Dominique. The nurses had said that she could not hear us, but we felt she could, and took turns talking to her. We prayed for her to live, even though we knew that it would be best for her to die. After 5 days, the doctors and family finally decided to take Dominique off life support. Lenny asked the doctors to save her daughter's heart and kidneys so they could be used as transplants for other patients in the hospital. We then went in and said goodbye to Dominique for the last time before they took her off the support system. She was wheeled to surgery for the removal of her kidneys, and transplant operations took place almost immediately. Her heart was sent to a hospital in San Francisco. Dominique's father later wrote that his daughter would have approved of their decision. She had a very kind heart. The funeral was held at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills, known for the affluence and fame of its parishioners. The day before the ceremony, the family made an unpleasant discovery. The funeral was scheduled for 11 a.m. on November 6, and that was the time given in the newspapers. And yet, it turned out that the church had also booked a wedding for the same time. Dominic and his son went to the church to sort things out. "I cannot comprehend how such an error could have been made," I said to the priest. "It's even worse than you realize, Mr. Dunne," he replied. "What do you mean?" "The groom in the wedding is a friend of the man who murdered your daughter." After the funeral, a long period of mourning awaited the family, and so did the trial. A few nights after the funeral, Lenny and I sat in her bedroom, she in her bed, I on it, and watched Dominic in Hill Street Blues. The episode had been dedicated to her on the air by the producers. We did not talk, we did not cry, we simply stared at the set. She looked so incredibly young. She played a battered child. What we would not know until the trial was that the marks on her neck were real, from John Sweeney's assault on her 5 weeks before he killed her. If Dominic had been killed in an automobile accident, horrible as that would have been, at least it would have been over, and mourning could have begun. A murder is an ongoing event until the day of the sentencing, and mourning has to be postponed. Dominic's father will also later say that during the trial he felt as if the crime was being committed once more, right in the courtroom. The trial would indeed turn into a nightmare. John Sweeney was taken into custody and first charged with attempted murder. Then, after Dominic died, he was charged with second-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter. It was decided that he would be tried by a jury. Public defender Michael Adelson was assigned to be Sweeney's lawyer. Dominic's family learned from Detective Harold Johnston that Adelson was very well known in the legal world. Adelson was assisted by Joseph Shapiro, legal counsel for the Mamizon restaurant and member of a prestigious law firm. His presence was probably the result of the efforts of John's boss. After all, only a day after the attack, Patrick Terrell, owner of Mamizon, described his chef John Sweeney in a Los Angeles Times commentary as a very dependable young man, and said he would obtain the best legal representation for him. And he didn't even offer condolences to Dominic's family. In July 1983, after the preliminary hearings, Dominic's family was offered a plea bargain. The case did not go to the trial. Sweeney pleaded guilty, went to prison for 7.5 years on a reduced charge of manslaughter, whereas the assault that occurred 5 weeks before Dunne's death was erased from Sweeney's case. Adelson made it clear that he viewed the case not as a crime but as a tragedy. The bargain went unanswered. Sweeney was to be tried by 12 jurors, 9 men and 3 women. John Sweeney's trial began in August 1983. He appeared in the courtroom dressed all in black, with the Bible in his hands, which he never even opened. At some point, the court had to be recessed because John claimed that the other prisoners were molesting him, and he needed time to cry. Dominic recalls, "I could not believe that the jurors would buy such a performance." Stephen Barship said, "You mark my words, something weird is going to happen in this trial. I can feel it." And Stephen Barship, who represented the Dunne family at the trial, was very right. Judge Burton S. Katz presided over the case. Here's how Dominic's father described him. In his 40s, Judge Katz gives the impression of a man greatly pleased with his good looks. He is expensively barbered, deeply tanned, and noticeably dressed in a manner associated more with Hollywood agents than with superior court judges. He has tinted aviator glasses, and on the first day he was wearing designer jeans, glossy white loafers, and no necktie beneath his judicial robes. Every seat in the courtroom was filled, and Judge Katz seemed to like playing to the audience. His explanations to the prospective jurors were concise and clear, and he made himself pleasing to them. He said funny things to make them laugh, but then was careful to warn them against levity. Interestingly, in 1970, Katz prosecuted members of the Charles Manson family for the murders of Shorty Shee and Gary Hinman. He was considered highly ambitious and was set to like cases with high media visibility, like the Dominique Dunne case. John Sweeney, in his defense, insisted that the murder was a crime of passion. Sweeney's actions were allegedly not premeditated and had no malice in them. The defense attorney saw what happened as a tragedy of a blue-collar kid who got mixed up in Beverly Hills society and couldn't handle it. Adelson announced that his defense would be based mostly on the psychiatrist's findings. He also threatened to find evidence to support the fact that Dominic was herself to blame for the tragedy. Adelson hoped to call neighbors to the witness stand who would testify that fights between Dunne and Sweeney were allegedly commonplace, and that she herself had driven him to attack her. During the hearing, a young friend of Dominique's named Brian Cook recounted a night on the town with his girlfriend, Denise Dennehy, and Dominique and Sweeney, during which several bottles of champagne were consumed. Singling Dominique out from the quartet of celebrants, Adelson, in questioning Cook, asked several times, "When Miss Dunne got in from the bars, how drunk was she?" The obvious intent of this ugly repetition was to give the impression in the courtroom that my actress daughter was an out-of-the-town drunkard, Dominique's father wrote. Speaking of that testimony, Dominique's friends Brian Cook and Denise Dennehy flew in from Lake Forest, Illinois, to tell the court about Sweeney's attempt to strangle Dominique. After the incident, Dominique ran away from her house and drove to the place of a friend, Norman Carby. He pulled out a camera and decided to take pictures of Dominique's neck. Now, those photos were presented in court as proof that Sweeney had been intending to strangle her for a long time. But Adelson was skeptical, and he had an answer for everything. He noted that in one of those pictures, Dominique was laughing. Carby explained, the following morning, Dominique was to audition for the part of a battered child on the Hale Street Blues show. Carby joked bitterly that Dominique wouldn't have to wear makeup for the part, which made her laugh. Mike Adelson couldn't risk his theory of a tragic accident being questioned. On July 20th, prosecutor Barship called Dominique's family and told them that Adelson did not want Lenny to appear in court because her presence in a wheelchair would cause undue sympathy for her, which would damage Sweeney's case. She was about to appear in court the following day, so the judge could hear her testimony and decide if it was relevant. The family began to worry. Adelson had discovered Judge Katz's incredible weakness for flattery and indulged him shamelessly. The judge and the attorney were like old friends, joking, laughing, and exchanging glances, something that could not be said of the legal representative of the Dunne family. The next day, at the request of the prosecution, Lillian Pierce, Sweeney's ex-girlfriend, was summoned to court. Detective Harold Johnston found out about her through a friend. At Adelson's request, however, her testimony was first heard without the jury to determine if it was relevant enough for the case. Later, Dominique's family learned that Lillian had sat in her car outside the church during Dominique's funeral, guilt-ridden and sobbing. She couldn't bring herself to go inside. Dominique's family also found out that the defense had contacted Lillian while Dunne was still alive in the hospital. Joseph Shapiro was intent on keeping Lillian out of court, and Dominique's family didn't even know about her existence at the time. When the district attorney began questioning her in court, her account of her relationship with John was so shocking that if the jury had heard it, it would have been the end for Sweeney. She had to be hospitalized twice after his assaults, once for 6 days, once for 4. Sweeney broke her nose, punctured her eardrum, and damaged her lung. He threw rocks at her as she tried to run away from him. One day, during another abusive argument, Lillian saw him start to foam at the mouth and began smashing furniture and paintings around the house. Adelson was obviously enraged by Lillian Pierce's testimony. "Were you not drunk?" he asked her. "Were you not drugged?" When Stephen Barship asked her if she came from a well-off family, apparently trying to ascertain whether John might have been interested in Lillian and Dominique for financial reasons, Sweeney exploded. He jumped up from his seat, dropped his prop Bible, and ran for the door leading to the judge's chambers. He was detained by guards and handcuffed to a chair. John cried, apologized for his temper, and the judge accepted the apology without imposing any sanctions on the defendant. "We know what strain you're under, Mr. Sweeney," Judge Katz said. Sweeney's attorney requested that the judge find Pierce's testimony inadmissible because it was prejudicial, and Katz granted the request. The jury only learned of Lillian Pierce's existence after the verdict. Mike Tipping, a reporter for the Santa Monica Evening Outlook, wrote an article about how John Sweeney went berserk in court. Because of his report, the jury might have found out about the incident, which upset Adelson greatly, so at his behest, the court reprimanded Tipping for allegedly exaggerating the incident. On the same day, a court gag order was issued for forbidding anyone involved in the case from speaking to the press. The truth was to be withheld. Since then, Dominique thought that John Sweeney was probably being sedated before each courtroom session to prevent further outbursts of rage in front of the jury. He was asked under oath, but not in the presence of the jury, if he had been sedated, and he said he had not taken anything except for his stomach medicine. The prosecutor asked the court for either a blood test or a urine test to confirm Sweeney's answer, but Judge Katz denied the request. It was clear whose side he was on. When Lenny finally appeared in court, her testimony was also heard without the jury. Judge Katz, as was the case with Lillian, had to decide on the admissibility of her testimony. However, during most of it, he was writing something and hardly ever looking at the victim's mother, which did not go unnoticed by her ex-husband Dominic. In her testimony, Lenny described an incident when Dominic arrived at her house at night after another argument with Sweeney. According to Lenny, Dominic simply lay in the hallway in the fetal position and refused to leave. Adelson asked Lenny if she knew what the couple had been fighting about. Had Dominic perhaps had an abortion? That was Adelson's way of once again implying that Dominic was to blame for what had happened, but there had been no abortion or any other excuses either. At the trial, Mike Adelson demanded, if any member of the Dunne family cries, screams, or rolls their eyes, they must be asked to leave the courtroom. And Judge Katz went for it. "Your Honor, Alex Dunne had tears in his eyes," Adelson exclaimed during one of the hearings. Sweeney too was given a chance to speak, though his lawyer of course would have preferred for him to never have opened his mouth at all. John was abjectly courteous, addressing the lawyers and the judge as Sir. He spoke very quietly. Although he cried, he never once became flustered. He described his relationship with Dominic as almost idyllic. John denied the testimony of Brian Cook and Denise Dennehy, as well as his attempt to strangle Dominic 5 weeks before the murder. Sweeney said he only tried to restrain her when she wanted to leave the house. John said he didn't intend to hurt Dunne that night. He insisted the two of them had made up and planned to be together again, and had also discussed getting married and the prospect of having children. On the night of October 30th, 1982, according to Sweeney, Dunne suddenly changed her mind. She allegedly told him that she had deceived him and lied about her decision to get back together, which was what prompted the attack. However, he claimed to not remember what happened next. He said that he woke up and was surprised to see himself on top of her, his hands on her neck. He realized she wasn't breathing and tried performing CPR, which caused Dunne to vomit. John then also vomited. Afterwards, he allegedly ran into the house and swallowed some pills, wishing to die with her. He returned to the driveway and lay down next to her, waiting for the pills to kick in. However, no traces of these pills were found either in Sweeney's body or at the house. The police who arrived at the scene presented their side of the story at the trial. According to one officer's testimony, Sweeney was calm and collected. He stated under oath that Sweeney had said, "Man, I blew it, I killed her." The medical examiner who performed Dunne's autopsy determined that the strangling lasted for at least 3 minutes. So John had plenty of time to stop and think about what he was doing, and could have saved her life. No one close to the victim believed the crime was accidental. An informant at Ma Maison told them that just before Sweeney left the restaurant to go to Dominic's house, he ordered 2 martinis from the bar and drank them. We felt that Sweeney must have decided that if he couldn't have Dominique, he wasn't going to let anyone else have her either. As Dominique's friends were certain through her thanks after the funeral, her best friend Melinda Bitten came across a letter that Dunne had written to Sweeney. We do not know whether Sweeney himself had read it, but Seaman Barsha presented it at the trial. She wrote, "Selfishness works both ways. You're just as selfish as I am. We have to be 2 individuals to work as a couple. I'm not permitted to do enough things on my own. Why must you be a part of everything I do? Why do you want to come to my writing lessons and my acting classes? Why are you jealous of every scene partner I have? Why must I recount word for word everything I spoke to Mr. Black about? Why must I talk about every audition when you know it is bad luck for me? Why do we have discussions at 3 a.m. all the time instead of during the day? Why must you know the name of every person I come in contact with? You go crazy over my rehearsals. You insist on going to work with me when I have told you it makes me nervous. Your paranoia is overboard. You do not love me. You're obsessed with me. The person you think you love is not me at all. It is someone you have made up in your head. I'm the person who makes you angry, who you fight with sometimes. I think we only fight when images of me fade away and you're faced with the real me. That's why arguments erupt out of nowhere." The whole thing has made me realize how scared I am of you, and I don't mean just physically. I'm afraid of the next time you're going to have another mood swing. When we're good, we're great, but when we're bad, we're horrendous. The bad outweighs the good. Judge Katz considered all this to be hearsay that was irrelevant to the case. On August 29, 1983, Sweeney's lawyer demanded that the judge reclassify the case. Allegedly, there was not enough evidence for John to be charged with first-degree murder, so the charge against him was downgraded to second-degree murder. The trial was a total farce. Here's another finishing touch to the image of Judge Katz as described by Dominique's father. A photographer from People magazine appeared in court one day, weighed down with equipment. I happened to know him. He said he had been sent to take pictures of our family for an article his magazine was doing on the trial. Neither Griffin nor Alex wished to be photographed, but the photographer stayed in the courtroom and took pictures of the session with Sweeney and the lawyers. At the lunch break, the judge signaled to the photographer to see him in his chambers. Later, out in the parking lot, I ran into the man. He told me he had thought the judge was going to ask him not to shoot during the session. Instead, the judge had said he wanted his eyes to show up in the pictures and had tried on several different pairs of glasses for the photographer's approval. In his closing speech, Sweeney's attorney Adelson described him as an honest young man, reiterating that Dunne's death was not a crime but a tragedy, and speaking of romantic love. This was the last straw for Dominique's father. We were sickened at his shamelessness. Leaving the courtroom during a break, I found myself next to him in the aisle. "You piece of shit," I said to him quietly so that only he could hear. His eyes flashed in anger. "Your Honor," he called out, "may I approach the bench?" I continued out to the corridor where I told Lenny what I had done. "That was very stupid," she said. "Now you'll get kicked out of the courtroom." "No one heard me say it except Adelson," I said. "When the judge calls me up, I'll lie, say I didn't say it. Everyone else is lying. Why shouldn't I? It's his word against mine." Steve Barshop appeared. "Is he going to kick me out?" I asked. Barshop smiled. "He can't kick the father of the victim out of the court on the last day of the trial with all the press present," he said. Then he added, "But don't do it again." On September 21, 1983, after 8 days of deliberations, the jury found John Sweeney guilty of second-degree murder. John was also convicted of assaulting Dunne on September 26, 1982. On November 7, 1983, Sweeney was sentenced to 6 years in prison, the maximum sentence for second-degree murder, with an additional 6 months on the assault charge. And then something changed. At the sentencing, Judge Katz harshly criticized the jury's verdict, saying he believed Dunne's death was a killing with malice. This shocked everyone. Suddenly, the judge was openly blasting the jury's foolishness. Katz then turned to Sweeney. "You knew of your capacity for uncontrolled violence. You knew you hurt Dominique badly with your own hands, and that you nearly choked her into unconsciousness on September 26th. You were enraged because your fragile ego could not accept the final rejection." It was simply unbelievable, but nonetheless understandable. Katz was subjected to such a wave of hatred from colleagues and ordinary Americans during the trial that he became fearful for his career and decided to shift the blame to the jury. After the verdict was announced, Katz called the Dunnes into his office. Judge Katz was utterly charming. He called us by our first names. He talked at length about the injustice of the verdict and his own shock over it, as if all this were something in which he had played no part. He said his daughters had not spoken to him since the verdict came in. The verdict caused an uproar in the media. Letters of outraged citizens filled the newspapers. The Herald Examiner published a front-page article about the case. Judge Katz was heavily criticized. In the weeks that followed, a local TV station published the results of a survey of prosecutors and criminal defense attorneys that named him the 4th worst judge in Los Angeles County. Jury foreman Paul Spiegel later remarked that if the jury had been allowed to hear all the evidence that had been withheld, they would surely have found Sweeney guilty of first-degree murder, and Sweeney would have received a longer sentence. In the end, John served only 3 years, 7 months, and 27 days for his crime. Although Dominique's family was unhappy with the verdict, They did not regret rejecting the original plea bargain that would have given Sweeney a longer prison sentence. We chose to go to trial, and we did, and we saw into one another's souls in the process. We loved her, and we knew that she loved us back. Knowing that we did everything we could has been for us the beginning of release from pain. We thought of revenge, the boys and I, but it was just a thought, no more than that, momentarily comforting. We believe in God and in ultimate justice, and the time came to let go of our obsession with the murderer and with life. After Sweeney was released from prison, he was hired as a chef at an upscale restaurant in Santa Monica. In protest, actor Griffin Dunne and other members of Dominique's family stayed outside the restaurant handing out flyers that read, "The food you will eat tonight was cooked by the hands that killed Dominique Dunne." Soon, Sweeney quit his job and moved out of Los Angeles. In 1984, Dominique's mother Lenny founded a group to advocate for victims of domestic violence, which she headed until her death in 1997. In the meanwhile, Sweeney claimed the grieving relatives were harassing him. On the advice of Tina Brown, the future editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair magazine, Dominique Dunne kept notes throughout the trial, which were eventually published as an article titled "Justice: A Father's Account of the Trial of His Daughter's Killer" in the March 1984 issue of Vanity Fair. This article touched everyone deeply with its strong fatherly love. It has also helped save at least one other life. In the mid-1990s, Dominique Dunne was contacted by a Florida doctor who had come across his article while he was at the dentist's. The doctor told Dominique that his daughter had recently become engaged to a chef named John Sweeney and asked if that was the man responsible for Dominique's death. It was. Dominique's brother Griffin contacted the woman and asked her to reconsider her decision. Subsequently, Sweeney, in an effort to avoid further confrontation with the Dunne family, changed his name to John Patrick Mora. It was later discussed on Reddit that as of 2014, he was living in Northern California and working at the Smith Ranch Homes retirement community in San Rafael in the dining room department. When John got out of jail, Dominique Dunne hired Anthony Pellicano, a famous private investigator who incidentally himself later ended up in jail, and he followed Sweeney for a while. Later, Dominique decided that this could have had bad consequences for himself. So he redirected his energy, his desire for justice and retribution, and instead began covering high-profile trials in America, something he did extremely successfully for many years. "The major experience of my life has been the murder of my daughter," Dominique said. "I never truly understood the meaning of the word devastation until I lost her." Dominique's mother, Ellen Griffin Dunne, died in 1997, and her father, Dominique, died in 2009. Soon after the trial, Judge Katz was transferred to a juvenile court, so in a sense, he got what he deserved. I would like to end today's story with a quote from Dominique's article about how he said farewell to his daughter. "There was plenty of time. I told the driver to take me to Crescent Drive first. I wanted to say goodbye to Lenny again. I knew what an effort it had been for her to put herself through the ordeal of the trial. She was in bed watching Good Morning America. I sat in her wheelchair next to her bed and held her hand. 'I'm proud of you, Len,' I said to her. 'I'm proud of you too,' she said to me, but she kept looking at David Hartman on television. On the way out, I took a yellow rose from the whole table. 'I want to make one more stop,' I said to the driver. We went out Wilshire Boulevard to Westwood. Past the AFCO Theater Complex, the driver made a left turn into the Westwood Cemetery. 'I'll be just a few minutes,' I said. Dominique is buried near two of her mother's close friends, the actresses Norma Crane and Natalie Wood. On her gravestone, under her name and dates, it says, 'Loved by all.' I knelt down and put the yellow rose in her grave. Goodbye, my darling daughter."